The notification pinged on my phone at 6:07 a.m. A single, devastating alert from our joint account. Wire transfer initiated. $1.2 million. My heart seized. Elena was supposed to be at her sunrise yoga class on the beach. Instead, her text arrived moments later. "Marcus, I'm sorry, I need this. I'm with Julian." Julian, the ridiculously zen yoga instructor. They'd emptied everything we'd built over 20 years. They thought they had it all, but they didn't know that for a wealth manager at Crestview Financial, a hunch is as good as a spreadsheet. And my hunch about Julian had been screaming for 6 weeks. They'd just taken the bait perfectly. The $1.2 million was a ghost. I took a slow sip of my Cuban coffee, the Miami sunrise painting the sky outside my office window. 20 years with Elena. She was always a seeker, chasing new gurus, new paths to authenticity. She craved a life she read about in magazines, a life I, a 47-year-old wealth manager, apparently couldn't provide. Then came Julian, all flowing linen pants and hollow platitudes about cosmic energy. He didn't see a woman to love. He saw a portfolio to liquidate. He sold her a fantasy, a sun-drenched escape from a life she suddenly saw as a cage, an easy mark. They believed they were starting a new life with our fortune. But a man who runs Crestview Financial doesn't keep all his assets in one, easily accessible account. That's rookie-level thinking. For the last 6 weeks, while they were whispering about their future, I was moving our future. 90% of it, to be exact. The $1.2 million they wired wasn't the jackpot. It was the entry fee for the game they didn't even know they were playing. A game where I make all the rules. The first rule of wealth management is to anticipate risk. My biggest risk, it turned out, wasn't the market. It was the man teaching my wife downward dog on a $300 yoga mat. The shift began 3 months ago. It was subtle at first. Elena, who used to plan our weekends around art gallery openings and charity galas, started talking about aligning her chakras. Our conversations, once about our future, our investments, our life, became monologues about her journey. "Marcus, you're so tethered to the material world," she'd say, her eyes distant. "Julian says true wealth is energetic." "Julian also charges $200 an hour to tell you that," I'd reply, trying to keep my tone light. But a knot of ice would form in my gut. The first real alarm bell wasn't emotional. It was financial. It was a Tuesday night. I was reviewing our quarterly statements when Elena sat beside me, smelling of sandalwood and salt air. "I was thinking," she began, a little too casually, "that Vanguard index fund, how quickly could we liquidate something like that?" I kept my eyes on the screen. "Why? Thinking of taking up day trading?" She laughed, a brittle sound. "No, silly. Julian and I were talking about a wellness retreat, a charitable project in Costa Rica to help people disconnect." There it was, the tell. Elena had never initiated a financial conversation beyond questioning a credit card charge. She didn't know an index fund from a savings bond. The question wasn't hers. It was a script. He was probing, using her as a mouthpiece to gauge the liquidity of our assets. I felt a cold, clear certainty wash over me. This wasn't about wellness. It was a business plan, and I was the unwilling investor. "Interesting idea," I said, closing my laptop. "Let me look into the tax implications. We wouldn't want to be reckless." That night, I didn't sleep. I laid out every asset we shared. Stocks, bonds, real estate holdings, the art collection, everything. I saw it not as our life's work, but as a battlefield. He thought he was playing checkers, making a simple move for the king. He had no idea he was sitting across from a grandmaster. The next morning, I made my first call. Not to a lawyer, not to a private investigator. I called my most trusted associate at Crestview. "I need to open a new trust," I said, my voice steady, completely firewalled, "and I need to start moving assets into it, quietly and quickly." For the next 6 weeks, I played the part of the oblivious, work-obsessed husband. I listened to her talk about cosmic vibrations and Julian's profound insights. I'd nod and smile, all while executing a series of transfers so complex and layered they'd be a nightmare for any forensic accountant to unravel. I built a fortress around 90% of our net worth, leaving the joint account, our primary savings, looking plump and untouched. It was the cheese in the mousetrap, and this morning I heard it snap shut. The coffee was a prop, a moment of theater for an audience of one. My first call wasn't to a lawyer. It was to the concierge at American Express. My voice was calm, almost bored. Yes, I need to report 2 cards stolen. Elena and Julian's supplementary cards on my Centurion account. That's right, freeze everything. No charges will be authorized. Thank you. Click. The first brick in their new life had just been pulled. They wouldn't discover it until they tried to pay for their celebratory champagne brunch. Operating in that state of cold fury for 6 weeks was the hardest trade I ever had to execute. I had to live a double life in my own home. I remember one dinner just 2 weeks ago. Elena was radiant, picking at her sea base. Julian says our attachment to things, to asterisk money, creates energetic blockages. He thinks we should divest. Live simply. I looked at her, at the Cartier watch on her wrist and the diamond earrings I'd bought her for our 15th anniversary, and I felt a profound, cavernous sadness. It lasted for a heartbeat. Then the cold clarity returned. An interesting philosophy, I said, cutting into my steak. Does he apply that to his $5,000 a head retreats in Tulum? She flinched. That's different. That's creating a space for healing. You wouldn't understand, Marcus. You only see the price tag, not the value. Oh, I see the value, I said, meeting her gaze. I see it perfectly. She thought I was talking about her. I was talking about my company's valuation. Every night, after she'd fall asleep listening to a guided meditation by her guru, I would go to my office. Under the glow of my monitors, I wasn't a husband anymore. I was a demolition expert, carefully dismantling the financial structure of our 20-year marriage. I moved assets through a series of shell corporations and blind trusts, layering transactions across different jurisdictions. It was a symphony of sabotage, conducted in absolute silence. Each transfer was a quiet goodbye to a memory. The sale of the bonds we'd bought after our first successful year. The liquidation of stocks that were supposed to fund our retirement in Tuscany. I wasn't just protecting my wealth, I was erasing her from it. I met Julian once, at a charity event Elena had dragged me to. He had a weak, clammy handshake and eyes that weren't serene, they were assessing. He looked at my suit, my watch, my shoes. He wasn't seeing a person, he was estimating a net worth. Marcus, my man, he'd said, clapping me on the shoulder with faux familiarity. You gotta get out of your head. The real currency is here. He tapped his chest. I almost laughed. The real currency, for him, was sitting in my bank accounts. He was a con artist, wrapped in a yoga mat, and he'd underestimated his mark completely. Now, sitting in the quiet of my office, the sun fully risen, I made my second call. This one was to a contact at a bank in the Cayman Islands, where the $1.2 million wire transfer was currently pending. It would sit there for 3 business days before it cleared, 3 days of them thinking they were free. Miguel, I said. It's Marcus Thorne. The wire we discussed, it's arrived. I need you to flag it. Internal compliance review. The works. Let's tie it up in red tape for, say, a month. I could almost hear Miguel's smile. A month? Consider it lost in the system, my friend. They thought they were on a plane to Costa Rica. They had no idea their flight was grounded before it ever left the gate. They had $1 million they couldn't touch, credit cards that were now useless plastic, and a very, very long month ahead of them. And I was just getting started. I spent the next 2 hours at my desk, not in a state of frantic energy, but of serene focus. I approved a 7-figure trade for a tech billionaire, rebalanced a portfolio for a Brazilian shipping magnate, and dictated 3 letters. I was a craftsman, and my work was my sanctuary. My phone finally buzzed at 9:48 a.m., an unknown number. I let it ring 3 times before answering, putting it on speaker. Marcus? Elena's voice was thin, strained. In the background, I could hear the clatter of plates and the low murmur of a restaurant. Elena, I was just about to call the police. I was worried sick, I said, my voice a perfect blend of concern and relief. I was, of course, doing no such thing. No, everything's fine, she said quickly. Listen, something's wrong with the credit cards. They were declined. I feigned confusion. Declined? Both of them? That's impossible. The Centurion has no limit. Where are you? What were you trying to buy? The questions were surgical, forcing her to lie. There was a pause. I could almost hear Julian whispering in the background. We're just getting breakfast. At that little place in the Grove. It must be a mistake. It must be, I agreed smoothly. Probably a fraud alert. Large, unexpected purchase. You know how it is. They must have frozen the account for security. Don't worry. I'll call Amex right now and sort it out. Just stay put. It might take a little while to clear up. Okay, she said, her relief palpable. Thank you, Marcus. She believed me. She believed I was the reliable husband, fixing a problem from afar. I hung up and stared at the phone for a beat before deleting the unknown number from my call history. I had no intention of calling the bank. I'd let them sit there, trapped in their celebratory brunch, for as long as possible. Let the embarrassment simmer. My next call wasn't to a bank. It was to a man named Sergey, a discreet security consultant whose services Crestview occasionally retained for delicate situations. Sergey, I said, pulling up a file on my screen. It was a detailed dossier on Julian, real name Julian Petrov. Not a yoga teacher from California, but a small-time grifter from Brighton Beach with a history of charming, wealthy, vulnerable women. I have a job for you, I continued. I'm sending you a location, a wellness retreat in Costa Rica. I believe the proprietor has some visa irregularities that the local authorities might find very interesting, especially if they received an anonymous and very detailed tip. Sergey's confirmation was a quiet click at the end of the line, the sound of a distant door being locked. I didn't feel a surge of victory, just the cool hum of a well-oiled machine performing its function. My fury from weeks ago had been forged and cooled into something far more useful, a tool. I spent the next hour coordinating with my London office, capitalizing on the early market opening, never once letting my focus drift. My personal life was in flames, but my professional life was a fireproof vault. It was 11:15 a.m. when my phone rang again. Elena. Her voice was no longer strained. It was frayed, on the verge of tearing. The restaurant noise was gone, replaced by the sound of traffic and a rising wind. Marcus, what is going on? She demanded, the thin veneer of politeness gone. The bank said the wire transfer is under a, quote, compliance review. They said it could take weeks. And the cards are still frozen. What did you do? I leaned back in my chair, swiveling to face the panoramic view of Biscayne Bay. I didn't do anything, Elena. It seems our sudden, very large international transfer raised some red flags. It's out of my hands. It's bank protocol. Each word was a carefully polished stone, smooth and impenetrable. Protocol? We're stranded. We had to have Julian's friend, a student, pay for our brunch. We have flights booked for this afternoon. The panic was escalating into hysteria. About those flights, I said, my voice dropping to a calm, almost gentle tone. I don't think you'll be making them, at least not from our home. A beat of confused silence. What does that mean? What home? The condo, I clarified. I've taken the liberty of having your personal effects packed. They've been placed in a climate-controlled storage unit. The key and the address are in an envelope with the concierge. I'd suggest you pick them up soon. The first month is prepaid, but after that, it's on you. The silence on the other end was profound. I could hear her sharp intake of breath, the sound of a fantasy colliding with a brick wall. You packed my things? You can't do that." "I can," I said simply, "and I have. The locks have also been changed. This is my home now, Elena. Solely. You made your choice this morning. You chose a new life. I'm just helping you get started with a clean slate." I could hear Julian muttering in the background, his Zen platitudes likely proving useless against this kind of tactical assault. "You're a monster, Marcus," she finally whispered. "No," I corrected her. "I'm a wealth manager, and you, my dear, have just been downgraded from an asset to a liability. Goodbye." I ended the call before she could respond, severing the last real tie between us. My next destination wasn't home. It was a sleek, high-rise downtown, the offices of Rossi and Stern. Isabella Rossi was known as the most ruthless divorce attorney in Miami. She didn't handle breakups. She orchestrated strategic dissolutions. I walked into her minimalist office, the air smelling of expensive paper and ambition. I didn't present myself as a heartbroken husband. I sat opposite her polished marble desk and opened my briefcase. "Isabella," I began, "I'm not here to litigate emotion. I'm here to execute a severance." For 20 minutes I walked her through it. The timeline of my suspicions. The dossier on Julian Petrov. The creation of the firewalled trust. The precise, multi-layered transfers that moved 90% of a 20-year marriage into an untouchable fortress. I showed her the final bait, the plump joint account, the pending wire transfer now lost in Cayman purgatory, and the canceled credit cards. She listened without interruption, her steepled fingers resting on her chin, her eyes sharp and analytical. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment, looking at the flowcharts and account statements I'd laid out. "Marcus," she said, her voice holding a note of professional awe, "I've handled divorces for billionaires, cartel wives, and Russian oligarchs. I've seen scorched earth tactics. This isn't scorched earth." She picked up the dossier on Julian. "This is a controlled demolition. You've left her with nothing but the consequences of her own decisions. The prenup we wrote 10 years ago will hold, but this," she gestured to the paperwork, "this makes the prenup a formality. You haven't just protected your assets. You've created a narrative so clear and damning that no court will see her as a victim. She's a co-conspirator in a failed heist." "That was the intention," I said. "We'll file first thing in the morning," she declared, a predatory gleam in her eye, "on grounds of fraud and dissipation of marital assets. By the time he's served, Julian Petrov will have bigger problems than a failed wire transfer." As I stood to leave, my phone vibrated with a text message. It was from Sergey. "Costa Rican authorities are very interested in Mr. Petrov's quote, 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 quote. Seems he's been accepting investments without a business license and working on a tourist visa. An immigration team is paying him a visit. Tomorrow." I nodded to Isabella, a silent acknowledgement of our new partnership. Walking out into the blazing Miami afternoon, I didn't look back. Elena and Julian thought they were flying to a new life in paradise. They had no idea I had already arranged for their paradise to be foreclosed on, their visas to be revoked, and their future to be a legal and financial nightmare. They had wanted to play a new game. I just made sure I was the one who owned the entire board. The drive home was different. The familiar route felt alien, the palm trees lining the boulevard like silent, judgmental spectators. My condo, once a shared space filled with the scent of Elena's expensive candles and the echo of her laughter, was now just mine. The silence was absolute, a clean slate. I poured a glass of Macallan 18, the amber liquid catching the light from the city skyline. This wasn't a celebration. It was a closing statement. My phone, which I'd placed on the marble countertop, began to vibrate incessantly. A cascade of texts from Elena, each one a different stage of grief and fury. "You can't do this to me, Marcus. This is my home. Where are my things? What storage unit, you monster tass? The wire is still frozen. The bank won't talk to me. Please, I have nowhere to go. Julian's not answering his phone. I'm scared. Thumbs up. I read them all dispassionately, like an analyst reviewing a failing company's quarterly report. The data was clear. The venture had failed, and the assets were in liquidation. I didn't reply. My response was already in motion, delivered by a professional. An email pinged on my tablet. The sender was Isabella Rossi. The subject line, "Service confirmed." The body of the email was concise. Process server delivered the summons to Ms. Thorne and Mr. Petrov at 4:17 p.m. Location: the Starlight Motel off the I-95. Apparently, their discussion about, quote, energetic blockages was quite heated at the time. He noted Mr. Petrov appeared to be suffering from a severe case of what we might call situational anxiety. The Starlight Motel. I knew the place. A grimy, pay-by-the-week establishment where hope went to die. A universe away from the Four Seasons and the beachside yoga classes. The irony was so thick I could taste it over the peat of the scotch. They had reached for $1 million paradise and landed in a $50 a night purgatory. The real justice, however, was unfolding thousands of miles away. As if on cue, a secure message came through on a different app, this one from Sergey. It was a single image attached to a short text. The photo showed Julian, his linen pants rumpled and his face pale with shock, being led away by two uniformed Costa Rican immigration officials. His serene guru facade had completely crumbled, replaced by the raw panic of a cornered animal. The text was brutally efficient. Subject: Petrov in custody. Visa fraud and illegal business operations. Multiple complaints from other, quote, investors are now being filed. His, quote, charitable project was a complete fabrication used to solicit funds. He faces local charges before deportation. He is no longer your concern. I stared at the photo. This was the man who had called me tethered to the material world. Now his entire non-material world had just been confiscated by men with guns and badges. He didn't see a portfolio to liquidate in me. He saw a mark. But the predator had misjudged the ecosystem. Just before midnight, the phone rang. Not an unknown number this time. Elena. I let it ring 5 times, then answered, putting it on speaker. The sound of her voice was unrecognizable, a ragged, shredded thing. Marcus. She was weeping. Marcus, they took him. The consulate called me. They arrested him. Fraud, they said. Something about Costa Rica. I took a slow sip of my scotch. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, my voice as flat and calm as a waveless sea. Sorry? She shrieked. This was you. This was all you. The bank, the cards, the police. You did this. No, Elena, I corrected her, my tone unwavering. You did this. Julian did this. I simply arranged for the consequences to arrive on schedule. You made a series of investments. They just turned out to be poor ones. I believe that's called natural justice. A desperate, broken sob came through the speaker. I have nothing. I'm in this horrible motel. I have $20. Marcus, please. After 20 years, please help me. The plea hung in the air, a ghost of the life we once shared. I looked out at the glittering lights of the city, a city I knew how to navigate, a world I understood. She had wanted to leave this world for one of fantasy. Now, the fantasy was gone, and she was a stranger in a land she no longer recognized. You said you were on a journey of self-discovery, I said, my voice cold and final. You wanted to divest from the material world to find your authentic self. Congratulations, Elena, you've arrived. Your journey starts now, alone. I ended the call. I didn't feel rage. I didn't feel triumph. I felt balanced. Like a portfolio that had been expertly reweighted, its toxic assets purged. The game was over. I hadn't just won. I had foreclosed on the entire board. I stood in the silence, the phone dark on the counter. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning. There was no surge of victory, no cathartic release. There was only the quiet, profound satisfaction of a perfectly executed trade. I had identified a catastrophic risk, hedged against it, and then shorted it into oblivion. Elena wasn't a person anymore. She was a closed position. A line item on a ledger from a past I had already written off. I walked over to the bookshelf and picked up a framed photo of us in Santorini, taken on our 10th anniversary. She looked happy. I looked content. I studied it for a moment, not with nostalgia, but with the detached curiosity of an art appraiser examining a forgery. Then I placed it face down on the table. My phone buzzed again. It wasn't Elena. It was Isabella Rossi. "Marcus," she said, her voice crisp. "Just a follow-up. Elena's new legal aid attorney called my office. They were floating the idea of a settlement, spousal support, a piece of the trust." I almost laughed. "And what did you tell him?" "I told him," Isabella said, a hint of steel in her voice, "that given the documented evidence of conspiracy to commit wire fraud, any further communication should be directed to the district attorney's office. I informed him that my client is prepared to press charges that could lead to significant jail time." The call ended rather quickly. "Excellent," I said. "Clean and efficient." "There's more," she added. "The board of Crestview Financial called me for a character reference. It seems they're considering you for the CEO position. The outgoing chairman mentioned your decisive handling of a complex personal crisis as a key indicator of leadership potential." A slow smile spread across my face. They saw what I saw. Not a messy divorce, but a masterclass in risk management. Elena and Julian hadn't just stolen from me. They had inadvertently provided the ultimate case study for my promotion. They wanted a life free of the material world. I was about to become the master of it. My real journey was just beginning. So here's the real question for you all. Was I right to move that money based on a gut feeling, or should I have confronted them first? Let me know what you think in the comments.